What's up, crew? Welcome to Filming in Progress, the show that takes you backstage into the world of local businesses and the people who make them shine. Joining us today is Mandy Potter, co-founder of Misfit Ventures, a groundbreaking LGBT+ venture capital fund. With a decade and a half of experience, Mandy is a trailblazing entrepreneur committed to elevating marginalized voices in business. Mandy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, I'm excited.
What was your first experience with entrepreneurship and business?
So I've told this story before and it's kind of funny because I was actually that kid where like I had lemonade stands and that sort of thing. But I also, so my mom worked at a like a copy and print shop. She was the VP at one of them. And so they used to, and this is obviously a while ago. And so they used to have all these like old cash registers, old Macs, things like that in the basement. So I would go to her work and stuff a bunch of them into her car and bring them, I was probably like 10, so I was young, and bring them home, and like I had a makeshift office at home. So when other kids were like watching cartoons and shit like that, I was playing business. Yeah, so my sort of like intro into like being like business and entrepreneurship and stuff like that was at a very, very young age. But I started my first company when I was 19, so also at quite a young age.
So did you know back then as well, or was it something that like your parents kind of just knew and they just fostered you into it, or how did that kind of come about?
No, so neither of my parents were entrepreneurs. They are now, which is kind of interesting. Like I actually had to convince my mom to start her own business, and her life has drastically changed for the better because of it. But they, like I think for me, it was just, I don't even know where it stemmed from or why, but I just got really interested in computers and how things worked. And I thought it was so fun to like play store and have a cash register and all these things. And I was always finding ways to like make money, or if I wanted something, like for example, I wanted a trampoline really bad and my parents weren't the type, they could afford it, but they weren't the type to be like, okay, we'll buy you a trampoline. They're like, well, you have to work to make up half of it and then we'll sort of like do the other half type thing. So yeah, so my parents, they definitely, the cool thing about my parents is that they always let me be me and do whatever I wanted to do. And so that was a part of like this business sense. Like I said, my mom would let me take these old like junky cash registers and stuff like that and bring it home and like make a huge space in the house of all this junk essentially. But I mean, one person's junk is another person's gold or treasure or whatever the saying is, so yeah.
Do you think that would have been different? Like maybe you wouldn't have ended up an entrepreneur if you weren't kind of, encouraged to play this way as a kid?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think so. Like whatever I wanted to do, whatever I wanted to be, I knew I would have that support. And so that's, a big aspect of it. And a lot of it, like when you think about entrepreneurs, a lot of times people do it for one of two reasons. One is that they have no other option. So that's why we see a lot of immigrants being founders and entrepreneurs, because they have a hard time finding a job here otherwise, right? And another is because you have the safety net. So mine was the safety net. I knew that if I started a company and exploded and I had no money, I wouldn't end up on the street. I had the safety of my family and my parents that I could rely on, whereas a lot of people don't have that. And so starting a company is just not feasible.
Mm-hmm. So 19, you started your first business. What was it?
So it was a marketplace for home services. So this is when I was actually going to Emily Carr for graphic design. And at that time I was cleaning houses just to like make some extra money, and my brother was actually doing the same thing at the same time, but separately. And then we saw this gap in the market and it was just impossible to find a good cleaner. There was no such thing as like a website where you could find cleaners, see their rates, see their reviews, book them like directly online. And so we're like, why don't we try to build something like that? So it came out of like, not necessarily a need that we had because we didn't need people cleaning our houses. We were young, our houses probably looked like shit, but it was more so out of like us being in the industry and seeing all these gaps and seeing how like horrible the industry kind of was and how it was run. And so we started that company. I tried to drop out of Emily Carr. My mom, that's one thing my mom was like, just finish it, like you're close enough. And so started it while still going to school. It was a lot of work, obviously. And then after that, we got accepted into 500 startups. And so we moved to San Francisco and then raised a bunch of VC cash there, and we ended up staying for quite a few years.
Wow. That identifying opportunities, you're now, I'm not sure how long ago that was, but you've done plenty since and founded plenty of businesses since. Is there a structure for how you identify these opportunities that are worth pursuing?
Yeah, so I think that every single business and most businesses come out of some form of need. Like I just said, it wasn't a need, my first company wasn't a need that I had, but I saw it as a need that other people had, right? And so my second company was Canada's first on-demand cannabis delivery company, and it wasn't because I was a weed smoker. Like I actually didn't even smoke cannabis at the time, but I saw my cousin at the time was going through stage 4 cancer treatment, and the only thing that would help her through those treatments and the nausea and all that stuff was THC or CBD. And then I had another friend whose dad had Parkinson's, and he was never a drinker before, and he got to the point where every night he was drinking because it was the only way that he could slow down his shakes and actually fall asleep. So we got him to try THC and CBD, and it helped him. So he was able to like stop drinking every single night. And so I saw all these different ways that it was like cannabis was so impactful beyond just like getting high and having a good time. And so I was like, there's some limitations to this, and one being, and especially with my cousin, was that there was stigma around it. So she didn't want to be seen buying it. She also didn't really know like where or how to buy it or what she needed or anything like that. And the second was that someday she didn't feel well enough to do that. So I was like, there's like an accessibility issue here. And so that's why I was like this medicine or this cannabis needs to be brought to these people. And we went extremely viral. Like we shot across Canada. We were on a multi-million-dollar run rate. Like this had been done in the US for years, like years and years. And when I lived there, I was like, holy shit, you can get everything delivered to you in seconds. But in Canada, we're always behind. So this wasn't a thing here. And so I think when people saw this, they were like, whoa, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And I would literally go places and like I remember being in a car dealership and some guy asked me what I did and I told him, he was like, oh my God, I use that every single day. Like it was kind of a crazy situation with how viral it went. But after doing like a bunch of like research and data and surveys and stuff like that, we found that a significant portion of our users had some form of disability. And that was the exact reason why I'd started it.
Unreal. This ability to identify these opportunities and pursue them further, I mean, it's the constant questioning of the norm around us, right? Like, was that like, or like accepting, I suppose, the way things are done in the past, right? So do you think that like seeps into other areas of your life as well? The fact that, you know, you're constantly questioning it, and is it like a blessing or a curse or both?
Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Like when identifying opportunities would be like, you know, you realizing that cannabis needs to be delivered rather than somebody going to the store to do so, right? As entrepreneurs, we're constantly questioning the way things are done in the world around us. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if that seeps into other areas of your life as well, in the sense of, you know, I don't like how this is done, or I'd like to do this differently, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I would say it's a big part of who I am in general. Like I question everything, and I think that everything can be done in a better way. And I am a justice warrior a little bit too, and that kind of could take us to what I'm doing now. But I'll give you one example. As like a young, at this time I was early 20s, woman, queer woman, covered in tattoos. You don't really see this in the Bay Area. And so when I was trying to fundraise, and I was walking into those rooms with my brother, who's this tall, straight, cis, white dude, all the questions and all the attention was directed towards him. It was like I did not exist in those rooms. And so I saw this bias firsthand really, really young. And this was a time that we didn't really like talk about diversity and things. Like it was kind of a topic that was starting to be talked about, stuff like that. But I remember being like, one day I'm gonna sit on the other side of that table and I'm gonna make sure that people like me aren't ignored and that they're getting funded. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that it does seep into a lot of aspects of my life where I question things and I want to make it better and I want to change things in every form, yeah.
Did you know when you were walking into those rooms, like from the first time or the first couple times, that that's what you wanted to do in the future?
I wouldn't say immediately, because at the time I was a founder trying to get cash, but I do think it didn't take long for me to think like I want to sit on the other side of the table. And so a lot of people's sort of avenues into VC, I mean, everyone's a little bit different, but I don't think a lot of like 19, 20-year-olds are being like, I want to get into venture capital one day. Like it's not like this like dream that people think about then, but that was mine. You know, like I remember someone asking me, hey, if you were to retire tomorrow, or when you retire, like what would you do? And I was like, oh, by that time I'll be super rich, and so I'll just invest a bunch of money into founders that I just truly believe in. And I was like, wait, that's a job. and it's called VC, and you get to use other people's money, And so I sort of have this like shift in my mindset of like, I call myself retired now because I'm like, I'm truly doing what I'm so passionate about and that I feel like I was meant to do. And like every single day it's not a job for me to wake up. Like I'm like, I can't believe I get to do this.
Awesome. Do you feel like every business that you had leading up to what you're doing now was kind of a stepping stone towards where you are now?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I've kind of done everything when it comes to entrepreneurship. Like I've raised millions in VC, I've sold a company, I've bought a competitor, I've bootstrapped a company, I've failed, I've kind of done it all. And so I think that like I'm one of those VCs that's like, don't raise VC. VC's bad. You know what I mean? Because I think that 99% plus of businesses are not VC backable, but the ones that are just like, they're the ones that I want to be really close to, and they're the founders, especially because we invest early stage. They're the founders that I just want to be surrounded by all the time, and they have this amazing idea that I think is going to like be exponential to like changing the world. And all like sort of like my thesis isn't just obviously about returns, like that's has to be a part of it, but a big part of it is like the impact piece and like who I'm funding and why I'm funding them and how they're changing the world.
Do you think that it takes, to be a successful VC who can see the opportunity and make a change and, invest properly or well with returns and every other metric of success that you're looking for? It takes having gone through those, experienced those failures, raised those millions, et cetera, to be able to do that effectively?
I think so. It's interesting to me, and this might be a bit controversial to say, that there are funds out there that don't have at least one founder as on like the managing partner team or just on the team in general, because I think that it's such an important aspect. It's like, how do you relate to them? How do you understand what it's like to grow a business? It's like when someone that's like a banker is trying to give you advice on how to run your company or grow your company, but they've never done anything like that before. Like, how do you take that advice seriously? And it also can be kind of dangerous to take the advice, to be completely honest. And so I think that the best investors have a background in operating businesses, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be a founder or be a successful founder or anything like that, but just having an idea of like how businesses work, starting it from scratch, getting it to a certain point. Like I've learned way more from failures than I have successes, and a lot of times a lot of it has to do with luck, to be completely honest. Like, sure, you can do things right and you can be really good at what you're doing and you can be great at marketing, you can be great at all these things, but I do think some of it is luck. And so if you have these certain experiences and you're able to then pass that along to the people that you're now investing in, then you're able to provide a different level of support and you're able to try to get them to the level that you need them to get to be able to provide those financial returns.
What are you mentioned some failures, you've experienced failures and you've learned from them. Do you mind identifying one of those or several and what you learned from that and how you've brought it forward?
Yeah, I can give you one that sort of jumps. There's lots of companies I've wanted to start and I kind of started it and then I ditched the idea because I was like, this is a stupid idea. But one of them was after I sold my company, which is the cannabis delivery company, I was like, oh, I could easily replicate this for alcohol. And so I actually got into an accelerator right away, like within like a month of me starting the company. I like signed on all of these different, so I'm the type of person where like, I don't just email like liquor stores to be like, hey, do you want to partner? Like I'll walk in and I won't leave until they say yes type thing. And so I signed up all these liquor stores and I obviously focused on Vancouver first. I started talking to like cold message, like the head of marketing at BC liquor stores and convinced them to like look at my company as being like their like sole player when it comes to delivery because they were just in talks about that. So I accomplished a lot in a very short period of time. And I don't know if this is a failure per se, but to me it kind of still feels that way. But I got into this accelerator in San Francisco, moved down there in February of 2020. We know what's coming next, COVID. And then I remember my father-in-law called us and was like, hey, they're talking about closing the borders. Like, you guys should consider coming home. And so we're like, okay, yeah, that probably makes sense. So we got into the car at like noon or something like that. We got back home to Vancouver at 5 a.m. I woke up at 8 a.m. in excruciating pain. Like it felt like it was gonna freaking explode. I went to the urgent care because I was like, are you allowed to go to hospitals right now? I have no idea. They sent me immediately to the hospital, and then I spent a month in the ICU, and I had a very rare, life-threatening form of pancreatitis. It was necrotizing, so my pancreas was dying. There was infections on every organ. I had blood clots everywhere in my body. I was on a feeding tube for months. I was on shots for blood thinners for months. I didn't eat for a very, very long time. I lost like 50 pounds, which, as you can see, I'm quite small as it is. So I was like a skeleton. And then I had almost a year-long recovery, like learning how to walk and eat again and all these things. And so that's where I kind of say like that business was a failure in the sense that like there's a bunch of things that like combined where like it could have been really successful because it was COVID, right? So like when I decided to start this, COVID didn't exist yet. But once I got into the accelerator, this is when it was first being talked about. And so I was like, holy shit, this is gonna make this company explode. Like people want liquor delivered to their house when they're stuck at home. And so that part was like hard for me to swallow a little bit when I kind of had to like indefinitely put it on hold and like eventually didn't follow through at all with it. So that I guess I would say is a bit of a failure, but it also was like the best thing that ever happened to me. And this is like one of those like cheesy ass shit things that people say like, oh my God, this like changed my life. It was the best thing ever. But it was. So I ended up actually taking a job at a larger software company in an executive position. Because I was like, I need to learn how to have balance and like take care of my body and all these things. And it was so much fun because I made a shit ton of money. I worked 9 to 5, I got weekends off, like something I'd never known before. So I like wrote a children's book and I learned how to do pottery and I ended up having my daughter. Like I just did all these things that otherwise wouldn't have been done. But yeah, I can't even remember the original question. That's how long I've been blabbing.
That's okay. No, that was great. Had you already exited your cannabis company at this point? Yeah. Okay. And so maybe, do you think it was like life telling you to slow down at this point? Because you had been a serial entrepreneur for years. You'd been to San Francisco. You'd been back. Like, what did you take away from that experience? And then what happened after the software company as well?
I think so. Like, I think that I'd gone such a long period of time without taking care of myself, like in any aspect. Like when you live in San Francisco and you're really young and you drink a lot, and I smoked cigarettes, and I didn't sleep very much because I was either working or you're networking constantly, so you're drinking and then you're hungover, and it's like I didn't eat well, I didn't work out, like I just did not take care of myself. And so I think that it was like an accumulation of all of these years of doing that. When you're young, you can get away with a little bit more, but as time goes on, it's like your body kind of catches up. And so I do think that like stress and burnout and stuff was a part of me getting to the point of how sick I got, on top of other things, like I think genetics and stuff, they think maybe was a part of it, but I definitely wouldn't doubt that. And so it was so, I think for me, like it happened exactly when I needed it to happen. Like I needed to slow down. I needed to like reevaluate everything in my life. Like I obviously quit smoking cigarettes. I don't drink anymore. I probably could, but I was just like, after going so long, I was like, wow, I feel amazing. And so it's been like 5 years and I just have absolutely no intention. So it's like, I work out every day. I'm like, I drink water. I eat 3 meals a day. Like it's something I'd never done before. And so I think that I like really needed that at the time, to teach me of like, because if you're not doing well, like physically or mentally, like you're gonna suck being a business owner, like you just will. And so I think that I was at a point in my life where I was gonna be a shitty business owner, and so it was my body's way or universe or whatever you wanna call it, of being like, okay, you need to chill out and like try to look at things a little bit different. So like I said, I got that job. I actually worked a couple exec positions. I loved it, but I was bored as fuck. And so I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. Okay. Yeah, I loved it, but I was bored as fuck. And so, because innately I'm a founder. And so when I had my daughter, I'm in a queer relationship. When I had my daughter, we were kind of like, oh, like the only way that we can get pregnant is going to a fertility clinic, right? Like, how else do you make a baby? Like, we don't have the parts that you need. And so we were like, what about turkey basting? Like we were joking about it one day, we're like, turkey basting's the thing, like we must be able to do that. And so we actually went to a medical store and just like grabbed a bunch of stuff and we're like, let's just test it, because we had a known donor. And so we're like, let's just test it and see what happens. We got pregnant on the first try. And we were like, holy shit. Like obviously, again, luck has to do with that and genetics and things like that. But we're like, people need this. Like we just did that for $60. We know people that have spent $30,000 at like doing IVF and stuff like that, and then tried doing turkey basting essentially and had success. And so we're like, we need to build something for people to make this more accessible and just to be like their first stop, their first step, you know? And so my partner and I actually started a company called Joey, and it's an at-home insemination kit. And so it gives you everything you need to try to get pregnant at home in the comfort of your home for like $90 versus $9,000 or $30,000 or whatever. And it's amazing because we get emails all the time of people being like, here's a photo of my baby, or like, we're pregnant and all this stuff. We're like, holy shit, had no idea that this was gonna happen. But had I not, and so I think my mindset kind of shifted also in the sense where like, I always had done things that I was passionate about, or I'm not passionate about cleaning, but I was passionate about there's a lot of immigrants that worked with us. They would start their own businesses. So I was really passionate about helping them. And they would call us and say like, I was able to make enough money that I can bring my son over from Nigeria, things like that. Like I love that kind of stuff. And then same with cannabis. Obviously there was like a big social impact aspect that, but I think that became even bigger and more important to me after I got sick and after I slowed down and I started thinking like, everything I do in my life, I want to make sure that there's purpose and that it's helping somebody. And so we started that company, and then this is when I was kind of like, I need to just do what I really want to do in life, and that's not, I knew I wasn't going to run this company full time. That was always my partner's a stylist, that was never going to be the case, but it was more of like our passion side project. And instead of like starting another tech company or joining another tech company, I was like, what do I really want to do? And it's investing in founders that I really believe in.
Unreal. Do you think that sickness aspect or period maybe was that brought on by just your drive to to push through and do everything that it takes to be a successful entrepreneur, or was there an element too of maybe the like I forget the term exactly, but where you have to do everything that it takes and you can't slow down, and that toxic mentality of you can't take care of yourself because then your business is going to fail. Hustle culture, that's it. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely subscribed to hustle culture for a long time, and then now it still seeps in. Like it's hard to get rid of, but now I truly try to stay away from it. And I even do a lot of talks and panels on this because I think that I was thrown into a very aggressive, intense form of like almost dying to be able to see the other side of like how toxic that actually is. And so as much as like every now and then I get to this point where I'm like, okay, I need to slow down and I haven't worked out all week and I haven't been eating really well, I need to take care of myself. It does try to like seep in because it's just a part of who I am. I've always been an overachiever, someone who's very competitive, worked really hard. Like even before my career, I was extremely competitive in sports. I got scholarships to the States for basketball. Like it was just kind of always who I was. And so it's hard to sort of like change that mentality even when you almost die. Like it's crazy how difficult, like at first you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never gonna like not take care of myself ever again. And then slowly life starts happening and your health is better and you're like, I'm gonna work 1,000,000 hours this week. But you have to sort of like check yourself. And something that my partners and I do now is we'll like say we have like a daily stand-up meeting and we'll be like, did you eat today? Did you work out today? And we'll like try to check on each other, which I think is really important. And I've had a very honest conversation with them that like when we first started the fund, I was taking way too many meetings. I'm also a yes man where like I'm not good at saying no. So I've been just starting to say no, which is very difficult for me, but I've been getting good at it. And so I had a very honest conversation saying like, I'm gonna start saying no to things a lot more often. If we're having too many meetings, I'm gonna ditch out of some of them that I don't need to be there. I need you guys to like check in sometimes and make sure that like I'm not like working too much and stuff like that. And so it's nice to be surrounded by people that like care about you as a human, and also know that that's going to translate into our business too.
I think there's so many people that can relate to being a yes person, like just like constantly saying yes to everything. What are some of the tactics, and some of us are still in it, speaking for myself, like what are some of the tactics that you've used to get out of that space?
Just doing it no matter how much, it's because I don't want to let people down ever, And so, especially, what's the hardest thing for me to say no to is when founders are asking for my time. And even if it's a founder that I wouldn't invest in, so like our thesis is investing in queer founders, but any type of underrepresented founder, if they ask me for my time, I have such a hard fucking time saying no, because I'm like, this is what I needed, But at the same time, I can get hundreds of requests like that. I physically can't. Even if I stayed up 24 hours a day, I wouldn't be able to do it. And so sometimes, and I also try really hard not to ignore people. I'll eventually, even if it takes me a long time, I'll eventually get back. But I just I feel so terrible inside that it's difficult, but I just have to do it. I just know that again, it comes back to, if I keep saying yes to everything, I'm not going to be good. I'm going to get sick. I'm going to, a part of when I did get sick, I'm immunocompromised now. And so I do have to be a bit more cautious with when I get sick a little bit longer than normal people do and all this type of thing. And so I have to remind myself that if I don't say no more often, I will get sick and then I'm out for a whole week. And how good is that? That's not good for anybody, right? And so I wouldn't say there's any tactics, except it sucks and you just have to do it. Yeah.
So you're sitting there sick in 2020. And you're kind of, probably reflecting, I imagine you were immobilized, you couldn't move, What are the values that you put forward? You're like, everything that I go forward with, everything that I do in the future, I'm going to go through it with this conviction or these ideas or these values. What were those, and how do they carry into what you do now?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was just that, I want to create a legacy that is about doing the most I can to change the most that I can, if that makes sense. So when I was thinking about I was like, okay, I could start another company and I could have X amount of impact, or I could start investing, and if I invest into multiple of those companies and they're touching all these people, then my impact is a lot greater. And so I actually would have conversations to myself about this. I was like, because my initial thought was just starting another company, because now I had jobs now at this point and I was bored of it and all this stuff. But I was like, but where, how do I have the most impact? And that was touching as many people as I can, right? And so I always thought that getting into the investment side and getting into VC would be a little bit later in my career, but I was like, why not now? And I also have the most amazing mentor who convinced me of a lot of these things too. So yeah, I think that it was a lot of it was just conversations with myself, being how do I make the most change? And that's sort of what drives me.
Love it. So you're able to take all those learnings from your own experience now into those who you invest in. I imagine there's some mentorship in there as well. First step, you decided VC was not going to wait. You wanted to do it now. What was the first step? Did you have funds to do it yourself? Did you have relationships to be able to pull on? How did you go about it?
I had no idea to be honest, I had no idea how to do it. And so I started reaching out to the few VCs I had good relationships with. And I was just like, hey, can we have a conversation? And then I was like, do you have any resources? And I got introduced to Canadian women in VC. And through them, I was like, set me up with every single VC that is willing to say yes to have a conversation with me. I had dozens of calls, literally dozens. And I was just drilling them, being like, how did you get into VC? What's your background? What do you think I should do? Blah, blah, blah. And I had this sort of set mentality for a long time where I was like, okay, I'll go work with a fund, and then I'll learn, and then one day I'll start my own fund. But it's not that easy when you have my type of background. And the reason for that is because the funds that are so excited about me because of my operator experience and that sort of thing, they're smaller funds, they can't afford to hire me. And then the larger funds are typically well, you don't have a banking background or investment background already. And so they're like, this makes no sense for us. And so I was like, well, where do I fit? And so I feel in true entrepreneur fashion. I was like, well, I'll just create my own job then. And so that's essentially what I did. I was like, well, I'm just going to create my own fund now. If I'm not going to do it later, and if I can't find a place where I fit in this ecosystem right now, then I'll just create a place.
And how did you go about differentiation? Obviously, you probably the values that you determined when you were sick, but that must play into why you're successful now, is because you had that differentiation. How did you determine that? I know that you experienced what you talked about earlier in San Francisco. How did you come about that?
So at first I was dabbling a little bit more into like angel investing, and I was like, I just want to invest in anyone that like is an underrepresented founder. So that could be, you know, BIPOC women, LGBTQ plus, people with disabilities, that sort of thing. Like I was like quite open to anybody, knowing that with a fund you need to have a more narrow thesis. And so when I was thinking about it, I was like, well, a big part of my identity and who I am is being queer. And it touches so many aspects of my life. Like I obviously have a female partner, we have a daughter, like we can't hide the fact that like, you know what I mean, that sort of thing. And so I was also thinking about like gaps in the market too. So there's Raven Indigenous Capital, which is the first Indigenous fund. There's BKR, which is the first Black fund. There's tons of women's funds now, like Stand Up, the 51, that sort of thing. I was like, there's no queer fund. And so I was like, I saw this gap. And it's interesting because there's so much data that's come out recently to support this. So there was a data set that they did on 140,000 founders over 22 years. So this is not a small data set. And they found that queer founders create 36% more jobs, 44% more exits, and 114% more patents. And then as I continue reading, I find out that almost 30% of Gen Z identify under the queer umbrella, so that's a massive portion of our population. And there's all these different things that were like popping out, and as the more and more I dove into it, I was just like, this is a massive underserved market. Queer people also receive less than 0.5% of funding overall, and so they overachieve, they're underfunded, massive market opportunity, and so it just made sense.
Yeah, no doubt. You must experience. I mean, you mentioned earlier that what you strive for is making an impact in everything that you do, right? Do you get to experience that daily? You know, people that you fund and have conversations with every day are probably, especially if this has never existed before.
Yeah, so it's the first queer fund in Canada. It'll be the largest in North America. There's one other in Europe that will be a little bit larger, but we're technically going to be the second largest in the world, so it's pretty significant. The conversations, I mean, I even think about myself. I'm like, when I was a young founder, I wish I could have had like a queer investor on my cap table. And a lot of people who aren't a part of the community like have a hard time understanding this. Like when it comes to like the different types of conversations that you can have and the openness and stuff like that. Like when I talk to founders who aren't queer and then I talk to founders that are, it's a very different conversation. Like you feel more comfortable and you're more open and you talk a lot more about like your personal life and things like that. And you just know that you've experienced similar hurdles and things like that. And so it's really like every single day I know that, I'll give you an example. So we just did a recent investment, and this is a founder that has, even given the market, has no issue in fundraising right now, but they wanted to carve out a certain percent for a queer investor. Like it was important to them. And so we get this unique access to, you know, what could be a very competitive landscape because of who we are and what we fund. And so, yeah, I mean, every single day I set aside like hours sometimes with founders where I'm just like, any queer founders that want my time, I'm setting aside Friday between 11 and 4 or something, like the first people to sign up, you get half an hour of my time type thing. You can ask me whatever the fuck you want. Like, it can be about investment, it can be about running a company, it can be about growth, I've done it all, right? And so every time I have those conversations, they're always like, it's so nice. Like, it's so nice to be able to like talk openly and feel comfortable and like all these things. So it's just, yeah, it's a really cool experience.
It's so interesting to hear about something that, you know, when you start a business or you start a fund or really start anything, you have these ideas of how it's going to play out, right? Like what are the benefits going to be, how it's going to benefit other people, yourself, et cetera, et cetera. But it's always nice to hear about those unforeseen benefits, right? Like you said, like it's had a business impact now. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So your learnings that you experienced in your own entrepreneurship, entrepreneur endeavors, do you now is it part of your process to sit at the table and mentor these other people and help them through things that they're going through?
Yeah, definitely. Like I've advised, I couldn't even tell you how many companies. I kind of had to put a cap on it recently. I had a founder that messaged me and was like, I really, really want you to advise me. And she's a queer Black woman. And I was just like, okay, like, how do I say no? And so I was like, I was trying to be creative with like my time because I only have so much bandwidth. And I was like, okay, I can help advise you. I'm not able to do like regular calls or anything like that because my calendar is just packed. If you have any questions or you're running into any roadblocks, you can text me, you can email me, and I will respond really quickly. And so I'm trying to be more creative around how can I help these people that are really asking, for my advice or really asking for mentorship, because I know how hard it is to find that. And I know a lot of people say no because I've had people say no to me before when I was young. But doing it where I can be realistic. So either it's going to be a no or it's going to be a yes, and I'm going to under deliver, right? And so I'm trying to find something in the middle of like, it's a yes, but this is what I can offer you, and I totally get if that's not enough for you. Like I can give you advice on like maybe some other people to reach out to, but if you still really want that sort of like advisorship from myself, then this is what I'm able to offer. And so I've been creative with that, which has been nice. Again, I forgot the question.
Okay,
Yeah.
You answered it perfectly. So you must have, is there a criteria then that you kind of go through, or like a checklist or something like that, where it's like, okay, I'm sure you want to help everybody, but like you said, physically you can't. So what does that criteria look like?
A lot of it has to do with like how I'm able to help them too, right? Like if their company is in a sector that I've never been in before, is like way above my head, then like I'll just say I'm not the best person for you. So like a lot of it has to do with way more than just who they are. And also like I want to make sure that like we vibe a little bit. So like I'll usually have a call if I'm, interested in learning more about like how I can help. And so that's a big part of it, is just like, do we get along? Like, does it seem like I can help you? But also like, what is the sector that your company is in? Because I'm not like a engineer, or I'm not, like I know a little bit about everything, but like I don't know a ton about a few things type thing, you know what I mean? So I do be cautious, like I'm quite cautious about that and who I'll say yes to, because I'm not gonna steer anyone the wrong direction.
Sounds like there's another potential business opportunity there in mentorship services,
Yeah.
that sort of thing,
Yeah.
Why Misfits? Why did you decide to call your company Misfits?
It's so funny. It was just like the first thing that came to my head, but it was always kind of there. Like, and I think a lot of people, like queer people, feel like misfits. And I think a lot of it has to do with my own experience too. Like I remember being in these rooms, like networking rooms, where like I stand out. Like I especially in like the Bay Area, like you go to these rooms that are like, I do not look like I fit in. And it used to make me, like I've always been a confident person, but it used to make me a little uncomfortable because it's weird to see like not a single person that even kind of, like even seeing women in the room sometimes was like crazy, you know what I mean? And so let alone like people with neck tattoos and shit, like it just wasn't a thing. So it used to make me a little bit uncomfortable, but then I started seeing it as like this massive advantage because people get really interested. Like they're like, who are you and why are you here type of thing, And so, I always felt like a misfit in that sense, where like and I don't see it as a negative thing. Like I actually see it as like a really positive thing of like, you don't just like blend in with every single fucking person in that room. Like you stand out and you're different. And a lot of times the people who are different and a little bit weird and a little bit, are the ones that are successful too, right? And so, yeah, I think just like through my own experience, and then when I was talking to my two partners, one of them loved the name because he was like, I fully feel like a misfit too, and I have in my life, and I feel like a lot of people have, especially that we're trying to fund, have felt this way before. Another one of my partners, we had to do like a presentation to try to convince him on the name because he's a little more traditional. And so, but he eventually was like, okay, this makes sense, let's go for it. And then the response that we've been getting, because I was a little bit worried about like what the market response would be, because most people have very kind of traditional corporate-y venture names and that sort of thing. People fucking love it. Like that's like one of the first things they say. Like whether it's like LPs looking to invest in us or other VCs or founders, they're like, like, this name's so good, you know, because I think everyone can kind of relate to it, right? Like we all feel like misfits, and then you add different layers on top of that, and you just feel that much more like one.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I think in an industry, and you hinted at this, that is littered with traditional names and this person's name and this person's name fund and that sort of thing. Like you said, everybody can relate to that on some sort of level. So
and I made sure that like our logo's pink and but like still like it's pink, but then navy blue is our other color. So we're still tying, like, we don't want to be like neon colors and be like not taken seriously also in a very traditional industry. But also like be like, we are different and we want to stand out in a different way.
100%. Do you ever experience imposter syndrome?
I haven't been asked that question in a really long time. No is the answer, and that's like a really shitty answer to give. But I think when I was younger, I definitely did. I think that like, especially when I was really young and I'm going back again to like Silicon Valley, I did feel that like I was like, I don't know if I should be here, and you're surrounded by all these really smart, like successful people, and I was very young and I hadn't done a ton at that point. And so I do think I felt it back then. And I sort of took on this like persona of like literally fake it till you make it type thing, where I was like, I'm here for a reason, and I believe in what I can do and what I can offer. And as long as like my guiding principles are positive, then why would I have imposter syndrome? You know, like that's always kind of been my mindset. And I've coached a lot of people through this too. And it's also like, we get one life. It's like, I'm not going to waste my life being concerned or like having a lack of confidence. And that's, I'm simplifying it too much, but this is a decision that I made at some point. I couldn't tell you when. It wasn't like one defining moment, but it was a decision that I made in my 20s at some point where I was just like, fuck it. Like, I'm doing cool things. I'm helping people. I'm changing lives, and I'll be where I'm at because of the way that I care and the things that I'm doing. And I just don't think that anyone should ever feel imposter syndrome, because I think you are there for a reason. Unless you're like lying about everything, then you probably don't have imposter syndrome if you're lying.
True, you probably don't feel it. Yeah. Does it ever feel like your career has moved really fast, or is it maybe the opposite? Or
that's a good question. I think it depends on like the time in my life. When I think about this VC section of my life, it feels a lot longer than it has been. Like, I technically left my last job over a year ago. And that's where I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to figure out what I really want to do. And that's when I started having conversations. We decided to start the fund in like April. And so it hasn't been that long, but it's felt very long. In good ways and bad ways. Like, bad meaning that like you're eternally fundraising, and so it's always this game of like waiting type thing, but like mostly in good ways, because like I said, every day I wake up like it's so much fun and I really love what I do. And so it's nice that it's felt long and that I'm not like wishing it away or hoping the days go by faster or anything like that. So I think it really just depends where I've been at in my life in that moment to answer it correctly.
It sounds like your world revolves around people, whether it be, people asking for funding, people that you're looking for fundraising from, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm curious, like, was that always the case? Did you always have a special way with people, being able to converse, being able to communicate effectively, that sort of thing? Or was that something that was learned along the way as well?
No, I think so. I've always been really social. Like, even as a kid, like my whole family is, I'm not going to call them anti-social, but they're not nearly as social as me. And they're kind of like, where does this come from? But I've always been really social. I've always loved connecting with people in a personal way and in a business way. And so I think I've always kind of been this way. Like, I truly enjoy going to conferences and shit, whereas like I think a lot of people are like, fuck, I gotta go to like another conference. Whereas like I get like stoked to go, and I'm exhausted after because I'm like pouring myself so much into these conversations. But I love going. Like, I love talking to people. I love meeting new people. I love seeing people that I haven't seen in a long time. But then I'm at a different stage in my life where like my recovery time is a lot longer than it used to be. And so like sometimes my partner even says like, you're not nearly as social as you used to be. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, I am. Like this is actually more exhausting, but I just need like a longer period to like recover in between. But I think that's just like getting old too.
Are you an extrovert?
I've always been an extrovert, and now I would say I'm an extrovert introvert. Yeah, because I never used to like alone time. Like anything I ever did, like whatever it was, I wanted someone doing it with me. Because I was like, what's the fun in this if I'm not experiencing it with someone else? Whereas now I'm like, love to go for dinner by myself. I go see movies alone. And again, I think that's partly like growing up. Part of it's probably being sober too. Like it's just you have different ways of like interacting with people. And then part of it's also having a kid. Like I'm just more tired.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
How old is your kid?
2.5.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So young, sassy, and difficult, but very fun.
How do you manage your time with a young family? Obviously, your fund's doing well. I know you do speaking engagements and that sort of thing as well. So maybe how do you prioritize what's important to you?
I have no idea. Like I literally don't. I was actually asked this recently. Again, a lot of it has to do with saying no to things, right? And so I've made a decision that I'm not going to be doing any more keynotes for a while because that is like a big mental load for me. Having to do like a 30 to 60 minute speech is a lot on like, I don't necessarily get like super anxious with talks, but I want to make sure that I do a good job and I'm expressing the right thing. And so I can't focus on a lot of other things like months leading up to it. So like I have to make these decisions now so that I'm able to have that better balance in my life because it is way different now having a kid. Like I don't know what the hell I used to do with my time. It's interesting like trying to think about that because I'm like so much of my time is spent with my kid and I want it to be with my kid. And then you're balancing like your partner and then you're balancing friends and family and business and all these things. And it can be really overwhelming. But that's where I've just made clear boundaries to be like, I'll sit on panels, like if I'm going to a conference or I'm invited out, I'll sit on panels, I'll like judge pitch competitions, I'll do fireside chats like this type thing. But like doing more structured talks, I've said no for the first few and I've had to turn a few down recently. And then saying no to founders a lot more, which is unfortunate. Like the more that people find out about the fund, the more you obviously get founders that are reaching out to you. So I have to say no to a lot more of that. Saying no, it's like we even went through in our like team meeting today, we went through all of our meetings this week and I said, which ones can I ditch out on? And then I said, okay, now you guys can ditch out on these ones because there's like, I can't even tell you how many meetings there were. And so it's doing things like that to just make sure like, also sometimes I put in my calendar like eat lunch. I'm not joking you, like work out, get on your Peloton type thing so that no one can block that time off and I have to do it. So that's just kind of how I balance it.
I think that's so important, carving that time for yourself and ensuring that you do the things that you need to do to ensure that you can show up, right? What do you think you're most, based on your unique life experience and the things that you've dealt with in your all the businesses that you founded and that sort of thing. Now, when you go and mentor these individuals, these founders that are looking for not only funding, but, also your mentorship, what are you best equipped to teach them or help them learn?
I think different types of funding is something I really like talking to founders about because so many of them jump straight to VC. And it's like, you probably aren't VC backable. But even if you are, there's other steps prior to that. So a lot of them will be like, I have this idea, I need to go fundraise $1 million. And I'm like, hold on. Like there's a lot of things we need to do before we get to that point. And one is like proving product market fit and like, is this a viable business and all those things? Because otherwise you're wasting your time. Like I literally just told a founder, I was like, ignore VC right now because it's a full-time job. Trying to fundraise is a full-time job and you're ignoring growing and running your business. So like, it doesn't make any sense for you right now. And there's also like other ways to get capital. Like I know some founders that are amazing at this is like non-dilutive capital. And so like doing pitch competitions, finding grants, all these things. Like I know some founders that have received millions of dollars by doing that. And they haven't given away any equity in their business. Like people think that they need to jump to this. There's also angel investors. Like there's so many different things. So that's one of the things I really like to talk about is like stop chasing VC until it absolutely makes sense. I've more traditionally sat in like growth roles, like growth and marketing roles, so like I can be really helpful with that. And I'm also just like an idea person. So typically if someone tells me what their business is, I'll be like, what about this? Or have you tried this? And they're like, oh shit, that kind of makes sense. So like I can take an idea and I can like run with it, and I have so many ideas, and so that is like really fun for me. Hopefully as fun for them, but otherwise I'm just like, do this with your business. So I would say those are some of the main things.
So do you find education is a large part of what you do then? You know, if your business is funding, but sometimes you're telling people that you don't need this right now, or you need to go look at this instead. Like, is education always a big piece?
Yeah, I think so. And I think because like the lack of resources, like historically, that underrepresented founders haven't had, like similar to like other types of founders, I think a big part of it is education. And so teaching them about different ways to get capital. We're also creating programs for all the companies that we invest in. We want them to actually go through these programs because we invest like quite early stage. So that'll actually teach them about like financial literacy and things like this that like, a lot of founders quite honestly just ignore for a long period of time, and they should actually be thinking about it a lot earlier on than they do. But also because, again, they probably haven't had the resources to, be equipped with these different types of skills. So education's a massive piece of what we do.
Why Vancouver?
Living here, you mean?
I mean, your business is here. We talked off camera about that you grew up in Edmonton. You were down in San Francisco. You chose to come back. Why Vancouver?
I think Vancouver's the best place in the world. Like, I truly do. I think there's very few places in the world that you could ski and surf in the same day. And I wake up and look outside my windows and I see mountains and ocean. And some people are like, it rains and it's so gray. And it's like, yeah, but have you seen our March to October? Because that's pretty freaking unbelievable. And the weather is mild and I like that. The people, it's interesting when I get to like the people and like the business side, because Vancouver can be quite sleepy in terms of like being like a tech hub and that sort of thing, especially if you can compare it to like a Toronto. And so I want to be a part, when I have more time, of like building that out a little bit more and like creating a better ecosystem here. To be able to be in a place like this that's still Canada also, like that's something I have to consider having a kid, is that like I don't feel comfortable living in the States with a kid, especially as a queer family. And so it's just, when you think about all these different factors, I'm just like, there's no better place.
What does success look like to you?
Success to me is how many people I can help and how many lives I can change. That truly is success to me. Like, sure, it's nice to like have money, and it's nice to have like fame in your industry, and it's nice to have all these things, but like I want my true legacy to be like, wow, Mandy like really helped these founders who created these companies that changed so many different lives. Like, that's what I want it to be. And I've been talking about legacy a little bit in this, and it's because I had someone ask me about it recently and I didn't know how to answer. And so I really thought about it and talked it through with this person. Because in my head, I was never like, well, this isn't about me. Like, what do you mean my legacy? I don't like that word either. Like, that sounds kind of like archaic, But then they kind of like explained to me that it's just about like, what do you want to leave here when you die? What do you want to change? What do you want, how do you want to leave the world? How do you want your daughter to think of you? That sort of thing. And so it's just about like how many lives can I change, really?
And I'm sure you're experiencing that all the time, right? As you're funding early stages, like there's so many wins in early stage. I mean, there's obviously a lot of hardships as well, but there's so many wins in early stages of business. So you're having these conversations and helping people through that.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's honestly, like I said, I couldn't think of a better job in the whole world.
As somebody who, I know you're very happy doing what you're doing, but you obviously have a lot of ideas. You mentioned that as well. Do you ever get like shiny new object syndrome where you're like, oh, I think I could go do this on the side or go do this on,
When I do something, I'm pretty full on. So I wouldn't say that I get distracted. The idea of like having like a venture studio one day is really interesting to me, because I am an idea generator. Like, I think that's one of my biggest strengths. And so having a venture studio where I can collaborate with a lot of people and we like sit in a room and we talk about ideas and then we like de-risk it and all these things is really, really interesting to me. And maybe there'll be an arm of that with Misfits one day, who knows? But nothing like, yeah, I don't think that I ever am like, oh, I have this really great idea, maybe I should go be a founder again. Like what I'm doing is a founder. Like there's very few differences in like starting a company and starting a fund, to be completely honest. And so I feel like I'm exactly where I need to be. And part of like that discovery process of like, do I want to get into VC is because I really needed to like ensure that this is what I want to do for the next 10, 20, 30 years, because it's not like you can just like quit tomorrow and then go get a job or something like that. Like you're at least in it for 10 years with Fund One, right? And so I wanted to take that very seriously and not lightly. And I just, like I said, I've always known that this was my path. I wanted to ensure that it made sense for me now in my life, and it really did.
You're probably building those connections right now that you would use in the future for that idea generation, right? Like,
yeah. We'll see what happens.
Totally.
Again, I'm not thinking about anything else. Focus on this, but yeah, if there's anything else that were to interest me, it would be doing what I'm doing. Just being able to be a part of like the generation piece too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you feel like you're building that legacy actively? Like it's closer than you've ever, maybe, I mean, it's probably not a proximity thing, but like, you're doing exactly what you're meant to do and changing the lives that you're supposed to.
I think so. Yeah, I really do. I think like our ultimate goal at Misfits is to prove the investability of queer founders who have been overlooked, don't receive a lot of funding, yet like the stats are just like astronomical to show that these are who you should be investing in. And I remember laying in bed one night at like 3 a.m. as I do, and I like shot up and I was like, fuck, I was like, we have such a big responsibility. And I like waited to like call my partners, obviously till a reasonable time, but I was like, sure, we're doing something cool and we're doing like a first of its kind fund, but we have so much responsibility. Like if we go, hey world, you should invest in queer people, and then all of our investments fail, we're showing to the world that you shouldn't invest in queer people. And so we have to like take that extremely seriously and make sure that we're making the right decisions, because this isn't just about like the returns that we'll give to our LPs, which is of course really important because we want to have a fund 2, fund 3, fund 4, but it's also about being like showing other VCs, showing anyone else in the ecosystem globally, not just in Canada, that like these are the founders that you should be putting money into because of these reasons, and here's the data that proves it. So it's a big responsibility. Yeah.
What do you think what is the biggest challenge that you face in doing the work that you do?
I think it's balance, to be completely honest, because there's so many different hats you're wearing. It's the same as a founder, but like you're constantly fundraising, you are constantly investing, and then there's so many millions of things in between. So it's like, it's creating this balance. And I think we're really lucky because we're quite a small fund. Like we're only raising $25 million for our fund 1. But there's 3 of us that are full-time, and that's not typical. Like 1 to 2 is pretty typical. And we all have astronomically different backgrounds and skills. And so typically when something comes up that needs to be done, we don't even have to talk about it. Like we just know who's doing it because it makes sense. We call ourselves like the CEO, CFO, and COO. Like that is exactly where we fit in all of this. And so I think a lot of it is just like balancing and making sure that we're doing the right amount of balance of like fundraising and investing and having those conversations with founders and building out our pipeline, getting them the right resources after investment, but also pre-investment, because even if we say no to people, we still want to be this source of like resources where we can be like, this doesn't make sense for us, or it doesn't make sense right now, but here's some other options for you. So we're actually building out like a multi-page resource that we're able to like provide these founders with of like other forms of funding, or where they can just anything really, accelerators, that sort of thing. And so if you want to like be a good VC, it goes well beyond just investing, and a lot of it has to do with like what you're giving to the founders. And I want to be very, very close to them, and I know my partners would agree with that. And so there's a lot of balance that has to be done.
How did you choose your partners in the first place? Like, what was there a process there, or did you just kind of fall into it, the right people?
It was so random. So I had my partner Sam reached out to me on LinkedIn and was like, hey, we're doing this like pitch competition at this one conference. We're looking for angel investors. Are you interested? And then we just started talking from there, and I was like, oh, like I'm looking at like potentially starting the first queer VC fund. And he was like, whoa, weird. I've been having that conversation. And that conversation has kind of been with this guy named Doug. And so I was like, okay, cool. Like we should just continue talking. And so it was a slow process of like getting to know each other, understand where everyone is at very different points in their life and their career as well. I was like actively trying to get into VC. Sam was working full time at Deloitte as an executive and like thinking about the next steps of what that would look like. Doug was like semi-retired. And so we were all at very, very different points. And once we got together and started having those conversations, it like felt right away because we all knew that we were doing it for the right reasons. Like it wasn't just like, VC's cool, let's do it, man. Or like, oh, we can make a lot of money doing this or something, because like that's not always the case. It was that we were passionate about this. And so, yeah, it was just kind of through those conversations that it just eventually made sense. And we just pulled the trigger, like, let's do it.
It's funny that all the great decisions are made by that gut check. You know, it just feels right. It's not for ulterior reasons that people aren't aware of or whatever the case.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
What's next is closing this fund and just making more investments and just building out like our programming and our supports and all of that. Like this is going to be what's next for me for a very long time. And so, yeah, beyond that, it's just being focused. And I feel like because I've been so fortunate to be in the position that I'm at now, and just knowing that I've wanted to do this for such a long time. And like I said earlier, like I was kind of like thinking I would do this later in my career. Like I'd probably start another company and hopefully that would be successful. And then maybe I would look at it. It just felt like the right moment, and that's like a very privileged thing because I haven't gotten a paycheck in over a year. Like not a lot of people can do that and also live in Vancouver, right? And so I'm able to do that with like the support of like my partner, but also like I've sold companies, and so like not a lot of people are in this type of position, and I recognize that. And so I'm like, I'm not gonna fuck this up, and this is gonna be my sole focus, and I'm gonna make sure that it is successful. And so that's my focus for the foreseeable future. Yeah.
And why delay something that, you know, as you mentioned earlier, you were capable of doing it. It was what you wanted to do. Why delay it any further?
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Where can we send people to follow along the next steps of your journey and what you're building?
So now I'm very active on LinkedIn, which is funny. So it's literally like LinkedIn / Mandy Potter. I got a good handle, I guess. Instead of, I see some people with like 1, 2, 3 years, like dots and stuff like that. So yeah, just Mandy Potter, but LinkedIn would probably be the best.
Awesome. Mandy, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. Really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Awesome.